Today is Wednesday, December 11th, 2024. This is Quick Start from CBN News. I'm Dan Andros. The manhunt for the healthcare CEO killer ends in Pennsylvania. We'll have that top story and more on today's podcast, where we bring you news from a Christian perspective. Don't forget to subscribe and leave a rating. You can also email us. We'd love to hear from you. Quick Start Podcast at cbn.org. That is our email address. Even if you just want to say hello, tell us where you're listening from. That'd be great. Quick Start Podcast at cbn.org. Joining me now to get through it, News of the Cray, as we do each and every weekday, bright and early, CBN's Billy Hallowell. Billy, on the focus story, a lot going on in Nigeria.
Yeah, really a horrific situation. We've continued to cover this. We're going to get into some of the recent murders against Christians that happened there.
All right, details on that coming up on the focus story. On the main thing, does Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy think that Trump will help bring an end to the Russia-Ukraine war? Seems like he might have a little confidence in Trump. CBN's John Jessup recently sat down with the Ukrainian president and discussed that and more. We'll have that conversation coming up on the main thing. Don't forget to subscribe to all of our CBN News podcasts. TC Debrief with John Stolnis, Billy's Newsmakers. You know where the links are. Go ahead and get on those if you haven't already. With that, we're going to head to the news in 90 seconds. From the courtroom to social media, the drama surrounding Luigi Mangione's case keeps escalating. Here's what we know so far. Mangione is accused of murdering United Healthcare CEO Brian Thompson, and he's fighting extradition to New York while being held without bail in Pennsylvania. He was arrested at a McDonald's after being recognized by a customer and an employee. He had a fake ID and a 3D printed ghost gun on him with shell casings at the crime scene inscribed, "Deny, Defend, Depose." His outbursts in court included claims about the healthcare system being, quote, out of touch and, quote, an insult to our intelligence. Merchandise echoing those phrases appeared online but was quickly pulled from Amazon, where similar items remained on eBay. Investigators are diving into his online activity to determine if Thompson was specifically targeted. The McDonald's where he was arrested is being bombarded with negative reviews, accusing employees of snitching, prompting platforms like Yelp and Google to step in. With evidence piling up and a narrative unfolding, this case is as much about public perception as it is about the legal fight ahead. That's just one of today's big headlines. You can check out more stories over at cbnnews.com. You know, this reaction to this continues to fascinate me, Billy, and not in a good way. The fact that people are trying to find some sort of positive spin on a person being murdered in cold blood because it gives them a chance to talk about the healthcare industry and the things they don't like about it. It's patently absurd, in my opinion. And I mean, it would be like if you showed up to a friend's, let's say a friend had a spouse murdered and they worked in like the energy industry or something, and you showed up and said, well, I'm really sorry about Sally getting murdered there, but you know, she worked in an evil industry and she contributed to the deaths of millions of people because of this evil industry that she worked in. I mean, you would be looked at as a horrible, awful human being, yet here's everybody. If they're not celebrating, they're certainly giving legitimacy to what this guy did.
Yeah, and I think from a Christian perspective, you got to love your enemies, feed your enemies, clothe your enemies, right? So even if you view, and I'm not saying this is the right view, that this person was evil because they worked for an evil industry, the reaction that a Christian should have to something like this should be horrified, praying for the family, loving the people who have been impacted by it, not rejoicing in it. So from that perspective, these reactions are disgusting and disturbing. But I think, they also show that we really lack complexity in how we understand things, right? People they want everything to be very simple, and they boil it down to, well, healthcare companies are evil. And so, it's a great thing that this happened, or we understand even why this happened. That is the wrong way to be thinking. By the way, these evil healthcare companies, right? Yeah, there are legitimate issues that happen that should be discussed outside of this person's murder. But these healthcare companies also keep people alive, and nobody's talking
Yeah.
about that. They've also kept many people alive and helped many individuals along the way. So, anyway, I hate that we even have to talk about that because there was a murder. It was horrific and senseless.
Yeah. I mean, part of me doesn't even want it because I agree with you. The American healthcare system, while not perfect, is certainly one of, if the not the best in the world. And just to think that, oh, they get free healthcare elsewhere. No, they pay for it just through a different mechanism. They pay for it through their taxes. They absolutely have higher taxes. And so it's not free. You're paying for it one way or another. So that's a whole ridiculous argument in and of itself. But yeah, I mean, you don't take the thoughts of a crazy person seriously, right? And I would label anyone who thinks that it's warranted to execute somebody, a law-abiding, peaceful citizen in cold blood in the street. Anybody who thinks that that's a reasonable thing to do is insane, in my view. And you don't listen to the rantings of an insane person. You don't take them seriously, right? If somebody goes out and shoots a bunch of people, we don't go, all right, let's all gather and sit nicely and see what they had to say because it must be serious. No, the conversation should be, we don't shoot people. That's what we don't do.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
Period. End of story. That's where it should be. I mean, maybe I'm a little bit old school in that fact, but I do think internet life is bleeding into real life, and that's how people are able to justify this stuff in their minds.
Yeah, and people are disconnecting from the truth and from faith, and so they,
For sure.
whatever thought or feeling you have, right? That's
Ye-
what you get to go with. It's bizarre.
Yes.
So
Yep. Yep. Got to love our neighbor. That's what we've got to do. Well, like you said, and love your enemy too. And so this is certainly not doing that, executing someone in cold blood and leaving that wife a widow and then those kids without a father. All right, we are going to move over to the focus story now, and big time prayer concerns over in Nigeria, where 48 Christians were reportedly killed recently. So what is going on there now?
yeah, this apparently happened in the nation's Benue state, and these 48 Christians were killed in just a 1 week period between November 24th and December 1st. And really disturbing, the first incident that we'll talk about was December 1st. Apparently, 18 Christians were allegedly murdered while they were on their way to church. So there were women and children included in this group of 18 Christians. So imagine you're on your way to church, like all of us do on a Sunday, and you are brutally murdered. Then on November 25th, about a week before that, 30 other Christians were killed. And it's suspected that it was the Fulani herdsmen responsible for these attacks. And that's a group, predominantly a Muslim group, and they're known for targeting Christians there in Nigeria. But really, really just deeply disturbing. One of the quotes was that they used armed, deadly weapons. They shot sporadically on the Christians and butchered some with machetes. Just unbelievable violence targeting the Christian population there.
So how are the local leaders responding there?
So a number of senators spoke out there in Nigeria. One of them, Emmanuel Undendi, said that these attacks continue to unfold unabated, undermining security, peace, and the socioeconomic stability of the affected communities. They're calling for investigations. A spokesperson for the Benue State Police Command told Morning Star News that police officers are doing everything they can to end these attacks. So there's an awareness, obviously, because this is happening again and again and again. We've reported on this a lot. That persecution is raging there, and yet it continues to happen, right? I think we're hearing that from these leaders. It's unabated. Nobody seems to really be stopping it, and it needs to be halted in its tracks. It's horrific.
Yeah, and of course that certainly, when there's nobody feeling really threatened for repercussions for doing these sorts of actions, it seems to stand to reason that it'll continue to happen. And this has been a problem there. I mean, can you kind of give some context to the overall persecution situation that goes on in Nigeria on a regular basis?
Yeah, well, I mean, let's talk through some of the examples and then we'll look at some of the numbers. You have a situation where just in August, we had a Christian church that was burned down. The pastor spoke out at that time. We covered that. And this is apparently, it was, by the way, the second time that this had happened to that church that had been destroyed. In April, we had a reverend who was reportedly killed as he was traveling to provide ministry to church members. Last November, we had the wife of a pastor murdered by terrorists as she was traveling home with her 2-month-old baby. I mean, the examples go on and on and on. There was a Catholic priest who was killed last year as well while he was traveling. So a lot of this is happening while people are traveling from one location to another. So you can imagine how terrifying that would be. And if you go back to 2022, May of that year, we had Deborah Yakubu. And you'll remember this story, Dan. She was a 25-year-old Christian college student. She was stoned to death by a Muslim mob. And that story, I think, was the first time the world was horrified by realizing how bad this problem was, that a Christian college student was stoned to death in 2022 in a modern era. And so this has been something, this persecution issue that has been tracked for a long time now. In fact, Open Doors World Watch List ranked Nigeria the 6th worst spot in the world, worst country in the world for Christians and for persecution. So it's in the top 10. It is known for being this way. And here, just to put it in context, in that 2024 report, more than 82% of the Christians killed across the globe for their faith were killed in Nigeria. So this is where the majority of murderous persecution is taking place.
Yeah, really, really scary to be a Christian there in that Nigeria region. And, it does sound and feel a lot like the wild, wild west out there. And that, what are you going to do if a pack of rebels run up on you? I mean, you're just kind of at the mercy of whatever they end up choosing. You see it in the movies sometimes, but I mean, imagine living that in real life with your family and a bunch of guys in a pickup truck with a bunch of automatic weapons roll up. You're just not going to stand much of a chance. You're just sort of at their mercy. And so, I mean, we definitely need to continue praying for them. And I know you've been reporting on this regularly, Billy. And so we definitely appreciate those reports so that we can be praying for them and assisting the organizations. I know we have different organizations on that are attempting to help at times, or at least shine light on that situation. And so we'll continue to look for ways to help. And we, of course, certainly can be praying in the meantime. So, all right, we are going to head over to the main thing now. And it's crazy that it's been a couple years, the Ukrainian-Russian war still going on now. So will this thing ever end? Will President-elect Trump have a big hand in being able to perhaps deter Russian President Vladimir Putin from continuing this war? Well, CBN's John Jessup recently sat down with Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy to talk about his thoughts on Trump, if the war is going to end anytime soon, and what he sees happening going forward. All that and more on this conversation, which is today's main thing.
Ukraine's wartime president, Volodymyr Zelenskyy, entered the world stage through a chain of events that led to the impeachment of an American president, and again in 2022, when Russia launched its full-scale invasion. Now, after nearly 3 years of fighting, he hopes to bring the war to an end as President-elect Donald Trump seeks to usher in a new political world order. In Kyiv, our cameras caught President Zelenskyy thanking battle-scarred soldiers at a military prayer breakfast. Back at his office, we discussed a range of topics, including peace talks with Putin, his desire to join NATO, and how Donald Trump's re-election in the U.S. is changing the course of Europe's largest land war since World War II.
President Zelenskyy, thank you so much for making time for the Christian Broadcasting Network. Well, one of the things that I've been struck by as we've been here in Ukraine, talking to members of parliament, talking to religious leaders, and even, ordinary people, is how frequently people are discussing peace. Has that changed because of the dynamics of President Trump being elected?
First of all, people in Ukraine wanted peace always. When full-scale invasion started, people had no other way as to take weapons because their children were killed. And I'm quite sure, I do not want your countries and our neighbors in the United States, I do not want you to have war, but if that happens, you would do the same. Ukraine is a very peaceful country and, by the way, a very believing nation. You know that even the majority of evangelicals are here in Ukraine. Our Council of Churches is the biggest one. People of different faiths, different religions, but they are very much believing nation. And for them, there is this hope that Trump has this position as a strong president. That is what is coming across. And I think that Putin understands the strength only. So then he would see that there is this strong president, strong country standing with Ukraine, and then we can achieve peace through strength.
How will negotiating for peace with Trump back in the White House be different than the current relationship?
I think we will be able to understand one another, and I think that with this new president of the United States, we are siding together. He does want to end this war, and we Ukrainians really want to end that war as well. And he understands that America cannot lose. America cannot come across as weak. If evil is not placed to where it belongs, then it will be examples to other authoritarian regimes that are watching.
Mr. President, I know that you're looking for some assurances from NATO. I think one of the terms that's used is the NATO umbrella. Your critics would say that that's not going to happen. So what do you mean when you say security assurances under a NATO umbrella?
When we are talking about a model that would disable people coming to your land with weaponaries and border protection, then we are talking the only available model, working model, at least among the NATO countries, because they are not in war, praise God. Praise God that they do not have that war, because it is suffering. So we do believe those guarantees, NATO umbrella, as I said, invitation is the step one, because that would send a very clear signal to Putin or any other aggressor, you name it, that Ukraine is going to be a NATO member.
Some estimates, the official count, I believe, is about 20,000 Ukrainian children who've been forcibly moved from Ukraine to Russia. Some numbers say as many as hundreds of thousands. What is the priority in getting them back? Where do they factor into the equation of peace talks?
Children, that's very difficult to come back. How do we bring military people? Even that is difficult. Sometimes we can bring back civilians, and we have some tools to do that. Now, when it comes to children, that's very difficult. Why? Because we cannot exchange children for children. Yes, they have deported children, deported by strength. We are not capturing Russian children. We are not stealing children. We are not deporting their children. That never, ever happened.
A lot of the support that you've received, for example, funding for Ukrainian aid, came through the help of evangelical Christians. We also have seen evangelical churches in Poland help to receive a lot of Ukrainians who are fleeing, provide them with food and with clothing and other needs. How crucial has the support of evangelical Christians been to what Ukraine has been going through?
As I've told you, we have the majority of evangelicals in Europe, and their support is very important, and I want to thank them. And I want to thank all the churches, all the evangelical Christians. As I have said, we have representatives of different religions and faiths and confessions, and from the very beginning of the full-scale invasion, they were helping a lot. And you know, anywhere where Russia would come and occupy, they would ruin churches and schools. And they killed 50 priests. And what profit do they gain when they ruined over 700 church buildings it just underlines one more time
Одна країна – це
that
російський напрямок.
this Russian direction, one language, one church, that's their understanding.
All right, appreciate that interview from CBN's John Jessup talking to the Ukrainian president there. Interesting stuff for sure. You can check out that full interview. We'll put the link in the description here, but it is on the CBN News YouTube channel. You can check that conversation out in full. All right, that's going to leave us with time on the podcast today for one last thing.
We've got Psalm 9, 7 through 8. But the Lord sits enthroned forever. He has established his throne for justice, and he judges the world with righteousness. He judges the peoples with uprightness. And I think when things feel uncertain or uneven or chaotic in our world, we can come back to God's justice and just find peace in that.
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of people look at some of the evils in the world and they think, man, how'd they get away with that? How come they're able to do that and, seemingly continue to do it? Well, they're not, if they escape justice in this world, they're certainly not going to escape it in the next. God will judge every thought, action, and deed. And that's both a comforting and scary thought at the same time. All right, Lord willing, that creek don't rise. We'll be back here tomorrow with more. God bless. See you then.